So one of the things that we're going to do today, we're going to talk about cannabis oil and cannabis oil systems using flammable materials. This is an incredibly serious subject. It's so serious, I put on a suit. It's not a funeral, it's not a wedding. And that's how serious we are. Yeah, but it's a party.
It will be a party. Did everyone hear me okay? So, Article 512, new to the 23 cycle, and my question is, what took so long? So, myself, Cheech, and John, we're from the Rocky Mountain chapter, we're from Colorado. It's been a long, difficult task inspecting marijuana concentrate production facilities. So, we're going to run you through some of the things we've learned from the mistakes we've made, and hopefully that'll help you run into or encounter one of them. So, I'm currently a licensed master electrician in the state of Colorado with over 15 years of experience. I teach for a lot of different organizations in Colorado, ICC. I teach the apprenticeship at the IEC as well as teach continuing education for the Rocky Mountain chapter of the IAEI. My experience with marijuana concentrate production facilities, I'm currently a plans examiner for the city of Arvada in Colorado, but I dealt with a lot of this in Commerce City, which has a lot of industrial zone areas, so we found a lot of these after the recreational legalization of marijuana. So it was there where I gained my knowledge and understanding of the process, the equipment, and also headaches and nightmares and stuff suffers from PTSD in some of those earlier installations after legalization.
Can I interrupt this moment, please? Let's use this card to make one more trip do it.
Alright, so what he's asking for is all your blue cards. If you'll sign those, send them to the end of the aisle, please. Make sure you get your CDU.
So the last thing I want to point out, I've never been more nervous. It's an absolute honor to be here. I'm not a CFP member. When Dimitrovich approached us, given our experience in Colorado, I was hesitant but accepted. But it's comforting knowing, and when Rudy asked the question, IAEI has done tremendous things for both Tom and I. So, Chuck Bellow, Steve Porter, McClintock, Iverson, all those presenters that come to our annual meeting, they're my Bruce Springsteen. So when I was asked to step in front of them and present, it was kind of, I guess. So we're here, bear with us, but given our experience, we'll get you through and we'll help you better understand the equipment involved. So, John, go ahead.
All right. So my name is Colin Blevins. I am a plans examiner supervisor in the city of Aurora. I also teach at IEC. We do continuing education as well as apprenticeship training. I'm also the education chair for the local Rocky Mountain chapter. And what I do in Aurora, I guess where I do the specialty to discuss this topic would be in the city of Aurora. I'm on the marijuana enforcement division. And I'll kind of go through that story and let you guys kind of learn from my mistakes, learn from what we've done wrong and what we've done right, how to apply Article 512 moving forward in the future. Like Chris, we both talked earlier, I just wanted to echo my gratitude for being here. And I just want to thank all you guys, everyone here. And I just want to say thank you before we get started. All right, so in 2012, Colorado was put in a very unique position. We passed Amendment 64, which said anybody that was 21 years or older was able to consume, purchase, possess cannabis for recreational purposes, which was the first time anywhere in the country.
We had some fun.
Yeah, it was a lot. So there was things called mud crawls, Green Mile, and there was actually tour buses of people going down Colfax, which is the main road in Denver, stopping at head shops, stopping at grows, and they were doing tours and getting high, driving down these buses, and it was literally clogging up traffic for quite some time. it was a very interesting time to drive the city. So
If you were a bus driver.
yeah, if you were a bus, or if you were an electrician just trying to get around these idiots. But so currently, Colorado has 3,000 marijuana businesses, and ironically, they employ 43,000 people in the state of Colorado for in some marijuana type related business, or I should say cannabis type related business. So what really happened was, I'll let Chris take it from here.
Well, we started seeing these production facilities for extraction using flammable solvents, and to say that the task we were given was tumultuous would be an understatement. So where do you go? We're on the 2014 cycle of the NEC in Colorado at that point. We've got some guidance. We can find some things in Chapter 5, Article 500. We've got some design professionals to lean on for hazard assessment, but ultimately, our minds were scrambled. We weren't sure where to go from there. So I didn't know you were going to include this. I'm happy you made yourself happy.
I'm Batman.
Perfect.
Yeah. You can tell this is a fantasy, not just because of our outreach, because there's zero traffic. It's a dream. So when we started this, we didn't know what we were doing. And so part of the reason when we put this presentation together that we were discussing how are we going to help other jurisdictions, how are we going to help other electricians not make the same mistakes, fall in the same pitfalls we do. This is an example of what the 512 article would now consider a C1 D1 area, or should be. If you can see in this photo, I've got 50 pounds of butane. I've got a butane extraction. And when this started, we said, oh, okay. We had some, smooth talking Hindi telling me about a hydrocarbon extraction, and I guess my ego was too big to ask questions. So he said, okay. So they ended up putting all this equipment in a wall that I later was to find out this is supposed to be a C1 D1 area. This is a butane extraction. They're literally, and we'll get into what that means and how that's going to affect us. But we allowed this. There's holes in this wall. It's supposed to be a 2-hour fire rated wall. They've got holes in the wall. They've literally patched up. They've got vents everywhere. They're supposed to keep a negative pressure in the room. Here's an additional 150 pounds of butane. So now we've got 250 pounds of butane. We've got a 5-gallon bucket of something, and we got a flammable cabinet back in the room. And this is a legal operating licensed marijuana business, and we had no idea what we were doing.
I like the slide previous. You're a qualified person if you've been given step-by-step instructions there on the left on how to remove the spent plant material after the solvents have gone through the process. So, a little scary. Finally,
There you go.
it's here, Article 512. So, get used to it. It's finally here. Go ahead and hit the next slide. Benefits to Article 512. Well, if you're not from Colorado, you're not familiar with it. That's where 512 is going to come into play, specifically that 3 section within Article 512 within Part 1. But everyone, show of hands, you feel comfortable around fuel dispensing equipment, commercial repair garages now? You know some of those areas are classified right around the dispenser where C1, D1, D2 began, and similar here, okay? Within Part 1, go ahead and next slide, Tom. Just kidding.
Yeah.
We'll get further in, but within Part 1, we're getting some area classifications now, okay? So we've got some guidance here with Article 512.
So let's talk about the why real quick. Why is this article important? Why was it included? I really couldn't find the public input. I looked for it. I didn't see it. But I can tell you from my perspective why. And from my perspective, why this is important is, this is the headlines that we looked up a month ago. Everything from 2019 to 2023, these are not old. These are very recent images. We're talking about 4 people injured, 2 people dead, 2 others burned, 2 people missing, 2 people seriously injured. It goes on and on and on. If you just Google accidents in cannabis oil production, they are everywhere. And it's really up to us to help them out, to save lives in a very real fashion.
It's important to note here that not all of these are backyard incidents. A lot of these are in labs, commercial facilities.
So what we've got here, there's no sound in the video, you're not going to that, but what we've got here is an example of a guy making some shatter with a open loop system, and we're going to get into that. So all he's doing is he's sitting there with a heat gun trying to dry some distillate, and we'll get into all the details, but as soon as the guy opened the door, introduced oxygen to the room, the whole place blew up. So now we're getting people injured, we're getting damage to structure, damage to the neighbors, people aren't even involved.
Getting a first-hand look at how volatile the business of hash oil production can be. You know, most of us had never even heard of hash oil before pot became legal in Colorado, let alone understand why people keep getting blown up trying to make it. The videos are all over the internet, but we wanted to see for ourselves what's igniting this dangerous trend.
We'll show you guys how it's done real quick. How to make some hash oil.
This is our simulated extraction tube that would be typically packed with cannabis. We're using this butane canister as our butane source. And we're going to dump liquid butane in for a certain period of time.
I can feel it getting cold in my hand right here.
All right, everyone ready and clear?
Right on top of the pot.
Ignition on 3, 2, 1, mark. If it's not done correctly, it can be extremely dangerous.
Experts in advanced engineering investigations safely demonstrating the dangers of making hash oil.
I just said, oh my God, what did I do? What did I do?
Dangers Wayne Winkler learned about in a very painful way.
And there was an explosion in my face, over my hands, and my hands literally melted off in 1 instant. And I'm burning a lot.
Cooking marijuana at home is no amateur science experiment.
I had no skin on my fingers to even down my phone.
Winkler says he agreed to make hash oil for a friend. That was more than a year ago. It feels like yesterday.
The worst day of my life in 1 instant.
And I think we've only seen the tip of the iceberg. I don't think that these problems are going to stop anytime soon.
Sergeant Jim Gearhart says Colorado law enforcement is tracking an increase in hash oil explosions over the last few years. Most dramatically, he says, since medical and recreational pot became legal here.
We're going to continue to see this for quite some time, unfortunately.
Oh, that did not just happen.
It actually happens a lot. In the past few months alone, multiple explosions across the metro, some with deadly consequences. From Longmont to Littleton, Aurora to Leadville, 1 in Norton and 3 in Denver just within the last few weeks. And Gearhart says in most cases, it's all perfectly legal.
If a person damages somebody else's property through one of these explosions, then certain arson charges might apply. If you endanger a child, then that becomes a felony form of child abuse. But beyond that, there's not a lot that really prevents people from doing this.
Zach Jason and John Schumacher are forensic engineers.
What's the concentration, Zach? About 60% LAL?
They investigate chemical fires and explosions across the country.
This is our explosion chamber.
The Call 7 investigators asked them to replicate a hash oil explosion to show how easily butane can ignite.
What you're going to see here is a lot more fire. It's not going to be as energetic.
And how the explosion becomes more intense. Greater the concentration of butane vapors in the area.
This chamber is designed to vent straight up. Now imagine if you're inside a room that's filled with butane at that concentration, there'd be typically a lot more gas in there, same concentration, with more gas, you ignite that, you have a bigger overpressure, a bigger explosion.
In 2014, we've already seen 10 in only 4 months.
Nurse Cammie Boyle says the hash oil injuries she's treated at University of Colorado Hospital's burn center are traumatic and life-changing.
So we're really on track to almost triple the amount of admissions we'll see with this injury this year.
Wayne was one of her first cases.
All of the burns are very deep. So I think the majority of them required some type of surgical intervention.
The worst experience of my life, but the best care possible.
He says it's that care that gave him the courage to tell his story and bear the emotional and physical scars of this horrific experience.
Now this year, I'm doing this interview because I don't want anybody else to get burned up, burned alive, maybe save someone's life. Oh my God! Don't ever do this. Don't ever do this.
Now, there's debate about whether it's legal for people who aren't licensed to even make hash oil for personal use. Some jurisdictions say it is, but the Arapahoe County District Attorney has several pending cases, so ultimately, judges may be deciding this one. We'll keep you posted. I'm Call 7 Investigator Teresa Marchetta.
You know, I think I'm a good person, and then I laugh at his accent, and no matter how many times I watch that video.
So, I bet there are numerous CBSC reports to back up need for Article 512. There was clearly substantiation. So we'll move forward, but part one we'll get a little bit into. We're going to get into some of the scope. The scope is fairly obvious. It's where the solvents are flammable material. And we'll get into that 3 of part one. Wiring, we're going to leave alone. We feel most of you here should be pretty familiar with the wiring and protection methods where you fall into a classified hazardous area. And Tom's really going to focus in on the equipment involved in the process. So, scope. Dot 1, Article 512. You need flammable materials. Often the mistake here, though, is we don't follow through the whole process. We don't look at the post-processing. You really hope that whoever, developers, owners, are transparent when they're going through the process with you as well, to hopefully delineate any areas appropriately. Okay? So I want to point out, we've got, for hazard analysis in the state of Colorado, we require an industrial hygienist. An industrial hygienist goes through and pretty much does case studies involving for the worker involved in the concentrate production facility to identify any occupational hazards involved through the extraction process. But we lean heavily on them as well as part of that hazard assessment team. So chemical engineers, fire department, Denver Fire Department did a tremendous amount of studies with these types of extraction facilities, and the majority of them during post-processing and processing were well beyond the 25 LFL. So again, there is substantiation. So the wiring, as I alluded to before, explosion-proof equipment, seal-offs, boundary seals, all those things. There's some guidance here in part 2. For the most part, it throws you back into 501 for guidance.
Part 3. Here's where I feel that there might be an issue with Article 512. Article 512 expects us to understand what this equipment does. Like Chris pointed out earlier, we're all familiar with a gas pump. We all understand where the hazards are for a gas pump. Not everybody understands where the hazards are when you're walking into a cannabis oil extraction. They think we're Snoop Dogg, they think we're Wilby, and that's just simply not the case. So what I want to do today is not necessarily focus on the article, but I would like to educate you guys on the process that they're using so we know when to apply the article. I think that's more important. Everyone here is some of the best minds in the business, and you guys know how to deal with the C1P1 area. I want to point out where it is. So, here it is. Since we've gotten here, you have no idea how many people have asked us for samples. What is cannabis? I even had a guy, I won't mention his name, from Utah of all places, ask me in the hallway for samples. All right.
So there's a subject matter.
Yeah. We have promised and promised and promised. So, let me see. Did we get this all done, right? We're ready? Okay. So I want everybody go ahead, open up your legs, look down, feel underneath your chair for me. Go ahead. Good. You got a surprise. Don't be shy. All right, actually, Chris just asked me if I could get a room full of the brightest people to stick their heads up there. Hi, Juan. All right. I did actually show you guys something, though. What I really did show you was a hazardous location. You've been sitting on that chair for 3 days, and you can't tell me that there's not some flammable gas. So, what is cannabis? Cannabis is a term used in botany. It's going to cover more than one thing. In botany, the term cannabis is used to refer to a family of plants called Cannabis sativa. These plants produce unique chemicals known as cannabinoids. So, Article 512 is intentionally named Cannabis Oil Production Systems, and it's named that way for a reason. Cannabis covers hemp, and cannabis covers marijuana. So both things are cannabis. So whether I'm doing a CBD extraction for cannabis oil, it could come from hemp, it could come from marijuana. CBD oil, most of the time, comes from hemp. CBDs are contained in marijuana, but most of the time, it's not worth the dollars spent to produce it, so we get THC oil from marijuana, hemp oil from hemp, marijuana oil, dab oil, and we'll get into some of these things. You guys are probably saying, hey, what does it matter? Recreational marijuana is only legal in 3 of the 17 states in the western section, so I don't care. Why should I pay attention to this? Well, the reason that you should pay attention to this is because we're still extracting oils from hemp. And the Farm Bill came out in 2018 that removed hemp from the DEA Schedule of Controlled Substances. So now we've got literal semi-truck loads of hemp coming through, and they're not going to use this for anything other than to produce down into oil. There might be some facilities that turn it into robe, clothing, other hippie stuff, but the vast majority of it is going to be used and turned into oil. And that's how 512 is going to apply to us.
Well, we're all aware of the fire triangle, the joke here. You know, the electrician provides the spark to the party, but we don't want to be that spark to this party. So, again, per 512.1, we got to have flammable materials used for the solvents, okay? And we'll get further into that as we take a deeper dive on the classified locations.
All right. So, which extraction methods do we need to worry about? You're going to hear about this when you do your inspections, when they ask you to wire these facilities, when you're either doing a bid or an inspection for this. This information is going to help you to know how to apply Article 512. We have different type of extractions. The ones in white probably are not going to affect us as much. The ones in red are definitely going to be using some type of flammable material. Wet and dry sieves, carbon dioxide extractions really don't fall under our purview in Article 512. However, soft solvent using ethanol and methanol definitely will. Butane, liquid petroleum gases, or what they call hydrocarbon, they will as well. They'll use butane, propane, heptane, they'll use all different types of tanes to get us there. And herein lies the other real part of the problem. Just because I'm using an extraction type that doesn't use a flammable method in one side, I might be using a post-production process that still uses a flammable material. And unless you're familiar with what's going on, it's going to be difficult to distinguish. So we have what we call off-gassing, decarboxylation, winterizing, and concentration, and the infusion of edibles. Again, the red ones are the ones that we probably want to pay more attention to.
Preparatory equipment, to be honest, Tom and I have never seen preparatory equipment in any marijuana concentrate production facility. If we go to the next slide, typically the dried leaves and flowers after the trimming is done within the grow house, this is what shows up to the concentrate facility once it gets there, but huge bags with the dried leaves and flowers. So this is what's going to be placed into the extraction vessels, and then solvents make their way in. The solvents, by the way, when Tom was pointing out, if we're in the scope of Article 512, yeah, there's an example. So this is what's brought into the concentrate production facility. There's really no preparatory equipment, but when there is preparatory equipment involved, it needs to be suitable for the environment, okay, which may be damp, wet, hose down, all those similar instances. Take it away, buddy.
This is our mascot, Buddy.
Yeah.
So what we want to worry about post-process is going to be extraction, degassing, mineralization, solvents, and again, filtration and distillation. So these are all terms that we're not used to using. So if you hear or see these terms, they're just kind of things that I want bells and whistles to go off in your mind. Here's an example. This is a CO2 extraction. You can see that there's a regular panel right here. I've got receptacles everywhere. There's no protection, whatever, and there doesn't need to be. It might be noted that we have, for a CO2 extraction, really the biggest thing you're going to worry about is it's an asphyxiant. So you might want to alert other professionals to the amount and quantities of CO2 you have on site. But for the most part, for us, for electricians, not going to affect us much. So I'm the inspector. I walk in, I say this is a CO2 extraction, no big deal. And then I turn my head slightly to the right, and I can see this little booth, and he's actually using, for part of his winterization process, they're taking what they call live resin, the distillate, and putting ethanol in it to thin it out. It comes out like tar. And then, so they'll use solvents to thin it out. And then to get into that process. So even though I have a process that doesn't necessarily have a reason to be in 512, my post-process does.
So we'll get to post-processing later, but that's where we really made a lot of our mistakes.
Right, yeah, not knowing the full scope of what these guys are doing. They say, oh, I've got CO2, you don't have to worry about this. And then the electrician wires it like it's a normal place, and he ends up in a lot of trouble. So what are these hippies talking about, right? We've got a lot of slang. And again, any of these things that you hear, that these guys, they should set off little bells and whistles and say, there's most likely going to be some flammable materials involved in this process. We've got ice water ash, Rick Simpson oil, CO2 oil, BHO, honeycomb, diamonds, dab pins, wax shatter, bubble hat, keep, tinctures, ice wax, CBD oils. It's a whole other language. And unless you kind of look into this, you're not really going to know. Do you know this one?
That's all you.
Yeah,
Those
sorry.
are our products.
So what I've got here on the top left, if you remember that video where the thing blew up, it's basically what they would call shatter. They take the distillate, the distilled oil, it's still bubbling with butane coming out of it, and they will warm it up, heat it up until it becomes a hard substance like peanut brittle is a good example. And then they'll end up smoking that. Well, we've got oils for our dab pin, oils, smoking products, vaporizers, things of that nature, all in those oils. We have, from hemp products, lotions, soaps, everything else. This was a facility we were at. This glass-looking hard black goo is a hemp byproduct, and they actually use that for bulletproof vests in lieu of Kevlar and something. It's so hard. So they do make some interesting things, interesting products out of it. In the middle, we have some diamonds, and we'll talk about that just a little bit more here shortly. But what are they trying to do with this equipment? This equipment is ultimately trying to knock off trichomes off the flower and off the plant. So what are trichomes? Trichomes are these little bitty crystals, little granular appendages that stick on the cannabis, the flower, and the leaves. And every type of extraction is simply trying to get the trichomes off the plant. That's what contains the CBD. It contains the THC. That contains the tinctures. That contains the flavor that everybody wants. It's all right there. Oh.
Yeah, essentially we're just trying to shear those trichomes off. Or as subject matter 2 puts it, the trichomes are the real sticky ickies there at the end.
Sticky icky, yeah. So if you haven't had enough Snoop Dogg references this time.
Let's take us into the extraction. I just want to point out here, this is an actual extraction facility we're at. That is the extraction vessel, the ball there. It's below a vault, and there are channels, sumps, or pits. So delineating the area, this one left us off scratching our heads here. Again, we really want to lean on the professionals here as well for hazard assessment. It's not up to us as the electricians. We've got guidance now in dot 3. There are some areas around the equipment that clearly need to be C1, D1, or D2, but ultimately, we got to lean on the professionals.
Right. So again, understanding this extraction equipment is going to help us understand how to apply our 512. This is a great picture of a facility Chris and I went to go visit, and we're walking in the door, and the guy says, we just had a fire yesterday, but our system went off and everything was okay. And I said, oh, that's fantastic. I want pictures. The guy thought I was a real jerk for wanting pictures of his fire. But what it shows is when you apply the code the correct way, this little fire, so what happened was, and I don't have a good picture of it here, but there was a guy in the back, and he was getting, this is an ethanol extraction, by the way. He was pulling out the ethanol, the final product, and there was a Class 1 Division 1 pump motor that had a seal fail on it, and the pump sparked into the ethanol, caught on fire, lit his jacket on fire. He fell backwards, knocked the whole bucket over, and when we went to go look at it, there was probably about a 3-foot area of darkened char, because everything that we had set up, everything that we'd done, it worked right. And that's how it's supposed to work. So not only do I feel like we really saved this guy's life, but how many other people in the building, how many people next door, and so this really is a big deal. You can see in this extraction, this booth, we've got it all there. And they have, I think, 2,000 gallons of ethanol on site.
Yeah.
That would have been a mess.
There is dry chemical fire suppression system. The big one there is, again, we're that third-legged triangle, right? So with these flammable solvents and the typical extraction process, it's there. We've got flammable vapors, we've got oxidizers, we've got enough oxygen within here. A lot of these booths will have supply air, and it doesn't take much.
I'm a lot more proud of this photo than I am of the one with the hole in the firewall. But you stay exact, right? So what is the extraction process? So one of what we're going to talk about, I'll go over this real briefly, ice water extraction. We talked about the tricone. This is nothing more really than a really expensive washing machine. They put ice in and knock the trichomes off the plant. It is a low yield process. You don't see it very much, just simply because it's not very cost effective.
It feels Neanderthal, like
Yeah.
the trichomes off. So, and as Tom alluded to, most of the commercial facilities we're talking about, they will be electing to use flammable materials because they want high yield and less time for the process. So you will see flammable materials.
All right, what I have here is a picture of a CO2 extraction machine on the left, and I have a picture of a butane hydrocarbon extraction on the right.
It's pretty obvious.
Yeah, it's obvious to me. Yeah, I mean, I can tell. But that's kind of the point. So once you guys are doing these, you're looking at plans for these, you're inspecting or installing these, you need to understand what the difference is. And the obvious difference to me when I'm looking at this, again, I have no C1D1 stuff behind the CO2 extraction. I have a big, tall canister of CO2 sitting there, and it is actually connected to the cylinders. The cylinders are typically smaller. The butane tend to be a little bit larger, but if you look at the butane extraction on the right, you can still see in the background that I have some CO2 bottles sitting inside the room. So you're going to need to know when you walk in there what kind of facility you're walking into in order to apply Article 512. CO2 extraction, not to get really into this, there's a subcritical, supercritical CO2. Critical point of CO2 is basically when you can't tell the difference between liquid and gas. And they use they mix a combination of pressure and temperature to knock the trichomes off the plant and off of the flower. All right.
Yes, this is your house. This is Tom's house. And he's conducting the extraction by stamp switches and receptacles. The typical make or break.
You ever heard that? Snitches get stitches.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, this is my house. This is purely for training purposes. This is an empty, donated extraction machine that someone gave me. But I wanted to make some pictures for the slides. This is a butane open loop system. And this is really how all of them work. You can see the blue handle, the little blue ball. They take the butane, it's in a liquid state. They pour it over the plant matter. They literally blast the trichomes off with the butane. It falls down into this cylinder in the bottom. And now when it gets to the bottom, I have this bubbling black tar full of trichomes, THC, cannabinoids. It's got all the stuff that we want. Literally just straight chemically off that plant. Whenever I have to get to that plant matter, I have to close the top valve, open the bottom valve, release all the butane in the air by pulling the hose off, reconnect the butane to the red handle, and then release more of it, and hope that I get all the butane back into the bottle. The boiling point of butane is different than the boiling point of other things, so you'll see people put it in dry ice so that they can try to recover more. But the simple fact is these open loop systems release a lot of butane into the air. This is an example of an open loop system.
I'm just going to comment. You'll notice the scale there. Next slide. For qualified persons involved, again, there is a scale here. So for disconnection of the equipment, in order to minimize the release of those vapors, they want that, the flammable solvent to go back to a vessel where it's captured again. But usually we're in 99.8.9% recapture. So a lot of the errors here, especially documented by Denver Fire Department, have been not just the process, but those people opening the equipment, servicing the equipment, going through the extraction process.
Right. So they are weighing that butane and then weighing it again when the process is done to see how much butane they've recaptured. So if you want someone to be safe, tie it directly to their wall, right? They don't want to spend more money on the butane. So what they're actually using too to recover that is this air pump, this air-driven pump called a Haskell pump. And this is the most common pump I see on here. And it will actually pump the butane back into the pressure vessel in order to try to recover that butane.
Right.
Tom, so who's regulating the MAQs for how much I can store in any one given room?
You need to talk to your fire life safety, your fire department. You can talk to, they're basically going to be the ones that are going to deal with that. City of Aurora is a little bit unique. Our building department actually encompasses the life safety. But I think we might be the only ones in the whole state to do that. So in general, talk to your fire department about how much quantities.
Yeah, good question.
Thank you, Brian.
O-rings, not really up to us as the electrical inspector, but again, placing common failure, following instruction guidelines from the manufacturer. Well, this includes some of those O-rings may be, or the equipment may only be suitable for certain types of solvents, or they need some of the O-rings or valves replaced where other solvents are involved. So again, common error point here for explosions, not following instructions.
All right, ethanol. Finally, ethanol extraction is more or less soaking the cannabis in ethanol and getting the trichomes to fall off by soaking them in ethanol, pushing them through a process, and then letting them come through. That's the non-technical version, but they're more or less just soaking the plant to get the trichomes off of the plant.
to booth or not to booth, right? Is it in the booth, is it not in the booth? And we've got some, guidance there now in dot 3 for equipment located in a booth and equipment located outside of a booth. So a couple examples again, equipment outside of a booth, equipment in a booth. Also, again, I just want to point out for part 2 for wiring above the booth doesn't fall into Article 512. Okay, so we're in dot 3, and now we're talking about, as Tom mentioned, the open loop type system. So this is equipment that during the normal process is going to release those vapors into the air, the open loop type system. So delineation, this is from the figure. I didn't put the nice little code book there like Dean had, but around this type of equipment, the open loop equipment, it is C1, D1, and any radius 3 feet around the equipment. C1, D2 extends from that 3 feet an additional 2 feet, so 5 feet around the equipment. And then the big one, sub-spitz channels measure from the floor above 18 inches and extends 10 feet horizontally, or a D2. But those spitz channels similar, like a repair garage, C1, D1. Okay, so a lot of the solvents here that are used, they do have a flash point well below the ambient temperature surrounding the equipment. Okay? The closed loop system. This will be listed equipment, and the important part is not just the listing, but it'll be marked that without ventilation, during normal processing, disconnection or removing the plant material that's been, the oils have been extracted, it needs to be marked, it will be below 25 of the lower flammable limit. That equipment, the delineation of the area around that equipment is a little bit different. It's going to be an abnormal circumstance, so it's going to be C1, D2, 3 foot radius around. You had a 10 foot area horizontally from the floor up 18 inches will remain C1, D2, and the pits are still, these solvents are heavier than air, C1, D1. The booth. It's important to remember, and now with, moving from subdivision of 11026 to the parent text, again, equipment in there, working space. It's rare you never see any type of panel cord within a booth. That would be pretty absurd to find that kind of equipment within a classified location, but it can happen. You still want to maintain clearances. For the booth, the big part, it is permissible to bring in supply air. Okay? Supply air cannot be recirculated for obvious reasons or exhausted elsewhere within the booth. Okay? Supply air ducts, supply air plenums are not a classified location. So now we go within the booth. We've got the open loop type equipment within the booth and some of the area classifications within the booth. All the pretty pictures there. I love these figures. I'm not going to read it to you. I just want to again point out a great section of the NEC is 500.4, right? You don't have to be Walter White over here. You don't have to understand this equipment that well. But you need to ask the question at the review stage, at the inspector stage, right? What are the solvents involved? Okay?
Blue meth is next week.
Yeah. And get a hazard assessment, get an area classification drawing. Okay? It's not our job as electrical inspectors. We've got guidance around the equipment. There's a lot of areas outside of the equipment. We're going to get to post-processing that really needs to be left up to the professionals.
Quick question. Go to the microphone. Are these booths, are they coming listed? Like a main booth or one of your slides?
I knew it was coming. Yeah, they are listed.
They come with the equipment, what you have and all that.
They're absolutely listed, I can tell you that. Maybe we'll keep which product standard they've been certified to under wraps, right? Yeah, the majority of these are, certified for spray application. We'll get there. I got the guide category information and some of the product standards here applicable for booths as well, for this type of equipment.
Real quick question, if I can. So, are you guys also accepting hygienist reports?
Yeah.
Okay. And then, in those pits and trenches, do those have floor drains? And where do they go if they do?
That's kind of the point, to put them on a curb and then vault. They kind of open up more. I mean, that's the whole reason. That's that precious oil. They don't want to lose it. They have cleaning processes and similar, but
I've just seen recovery systems and I just didn't see it was in any of those slides. I was a little late.
have you seen much like trench drains or anything like that?
We're pretty much not allowed. We can't avoid it.
Yeah.
We haven't ran into it yet. But we try to come down on them pretty hard and then loosen up at the end. It's a lot easier to just be straight across the board.
Good question. Closed loop within the booth again. C1D2 within the booth, and no delineation outside the booth. That is an oven on the left in our data. So you'll see some fun equipment involved.
So you get to determine if that's actually listed or if he's just a big fan of anime.
But this is where really the hazard lies. We're getting into post-processing now. They've extracted oils from the spent plant matter, and this is where the largest hazards lie. There's still some work to be done as far as Article 512 and maybe post-processing.
All right, so multiple different types of extractions are going to use a winterization process. It sounds really fancy until I explain what it is. But ultimately what they're doing is they're taking a CO2 extraction. They might be taking a solvent of any type, whether it be BHO or some other type, and they're actually taking it in an open container over to a freezer, and they're freezing it. And the best thing that I could relate this to is bone broth. Have any of you guys ever made a bone broth? Had your mom make it? What happens is they freeze it, all the fats, lipids, all that stuff that they don't want comes floating up to the top. And then they can just skim it off. They can put a little bit more solvent in it, and then they can move on to the next process. But this is a bucket of goo filled with a hazardous material, nonetheless.
Before you get to the rotobath, when it goes into the freezer, again, area classification drawings, understand the whole process, ask the questions, lean on those. Oftentimes the freezers they use, again, the ambient temperature is above the flash point of the solids. So
That's a solid point, thank you. So concentrated the extract. So I'm still going to take this big glass globe off the back of this thing. I'm going to fill it up with this tar substance that also contains alcohol, or most of the time it's going to be alcohol. And they put it in here. This little silver container is filled with a warm bath of water. They dip it in there, and what they're trying to do is they're trying to get a larger surface area, right? Because evaporation is a surface phenomenon, okay? So we don't evaporate from the bottom of the jar, we evaporate from the top. So the larger we can make that surface area, the more evaporation we get to happen. This is a closed-loop evaporator, and it will take and it will separate all of your alcohol in a vacuum into your condenser tubes, and you will recover that alcohol. Whether you want to use it again or not may not be a wise choice. But at this point, they're taking the hazardous material out. However, this machine is still going to be sitting there containing a fair amount of alcohol, ethanol specifically. These machines come in different shapes and sizes, so don't be fooled. This thing here is the same thing. It's the same idea. I want to to create the most surface area I can, smear it all over the glass, increase my evaporation, and have it separated so that I can have a more pure product. That's really what we're trying to get at. Here's an example of another closed-loop rotovap system. So, like I said, it doesn't matter what type of extraction. They could be using an ice water extraction, but still using flammable materials in the post-production process. If you guys see this type of machinery, you know what it is.
Okay. And so Jeff Fechtel has helped me out here a little bit, but here's the product standard, here's the guide category information. We've touched on this throughout the days we've had here together. There are several pieces of listed equipment as well as listed booths specifically for the plant oil extraction. Thank you, Jeff. If you didn't visit their booth, there's a photo of the link again as well to go to. Registration's free. You can view product standards online for free. It's a great tool.
Decarboxylation. It's a lot of, it's a big word. What does this mean and what is the process? So, one important thing about marijuana that I didn't understand, or cannabis, I guess, whenever I first started was, can I touch it? Can it get me high if I touch it? Can it get me high if my dog eats it? So decarboxylation is a process that they use. They take the THCA molecule and they heat it up to 240 degrees for a certain period of time, 30 to 60 minutes. And what that does is it will remove that A molecule, so we no longer have that acid attached. And then we end up with what we all know and love, tetrahydrocannabinol oil delta 9, or THC. And that is what gets us high. So we will not get any psychotropic effects of anything from touching it, dealing with it. So if you guys are around it and you happen to run into it, I mean, most of us work, a lot of us work for government or places where we can't test positive. This is important for us to know. So you're not going to get high from touching it. It's going to have to reach a certain temperature for that THC to actually take effect in the human body.
We did plenty of homework.
Oh God, yeah, I'm still.
And you will come out smelling.
Yeah.
Like a Scott, for sure. So when we did to make tours, I was curious why Tom was bringing a bottle of Febreze.
Yeah.
If you're in those grow facilities, yeah.
It's stinky. It definitely is stinky. So don't worry about it for the most part. You're all right. What they will use to get this decarboxylation is something that we do need to pay attention to. They will use these things called vacuum ovens. And what they'll do is they will heat it up under pressure for a certain period of time and basically knock off that acid molecule to get THC out of it. So they will get the distillate, it will be a bubbling pile of goo, and it's going to be in a BHO extraction for butane. They'll set it by a fan and let that until it visually is no longer bubbling. It will calm down, it doesn't look like bubbling hot lava. Then they'll take it over to one of these machines, and really all we have at that point is going to be trace amounts of salt left in there. So for the most part, once we get to this area, we're okay. And I'm going to say for the most part, right? Not always, not every time. So again, depending on the use, using the housing, using the area, the vacuums may need to be a classified location if they're going to do something else. And that's why it's important we know what these guys are up to. Right? If I walk into this place and I see vacuum ovens, 99% of the time I'm not worried about it. But there are some other products that they will put a live resin or a BHO butane fuel in a container under pressure and then heat it up on purpose. So what they've got now on the market that's fairly new is something called THC diamine. I left the A molecule on there for a reason. They do not decarboxylate this. They will take it straight out of the BHO goo stick it under pressure, stick it in the oven, and then they will let those molecules form crystals. What this ends up doing is it creates a 97 to 99% pure THC. This is probably the most potent THC you can get on the market. It's incredibly expensive. It's probably more than crack. But so people are trying it, and they just can't seem to get a fast way to get it done. But this is something that would fall under 512. So I would then have these ovens would fall into a class 5 location. And that's really the point of this. So again, because it's THCA and because it's so pure, you might say, well, how do I get high from it? Well, there's a certain way to smoke. So if you've ever heard of dabs or vaporizers, because joints and bombs aren't going to do the trick. You can light it, it's not going to get you high. So there are certain ways to smoke these things. Everybody's always looking for a better way to do things.
In summary, yeah, we'll open it up for question, but hopefully everyone feels warm and fuzzy with the process now and understands the process better. That was the goal, okay? From A to Z, extracting plant oil. Tom, go ahead with the next slide.
And I just want to point it out again. You might think this doesn't apply to you, but because this is the USDA's website as of April of 2023, showing us how many hemp grows are in each state. So this is not something, we have 121 where we're standing. There's 121 hemp grows in the state of West Virginia, whether you can smoke it here or not. So I guarantee you there's somebody in this state using these products in this manner.
So the biggest one again for me, I get this question a lot, and I've never been comfortable answering and never will be. It is not my responsibility as electrical inspector to delineate classified areas. Yes, similar to Article 511, 514, there are some equipment where clearly we know the process, there will be a fire triangle present. There's going to be release of combustible vapors from the flammable materials. You want to lean on the design professionals and have them provide you a hazard assessment and classification drawings. Now, if there's no other questions, go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, so just real quick, I know this is cannabis. You identified that hemp kind of gets lumped into there. But what about other oil extraction processes? Do they also use a flammable solvent? And if so, we're not covering them here.
Yeah, and most oils though, we looked into like, what's the word I'm looking for? My mother
Essential
loves all
oils.
these. Yeah, essential oils, thank you. It's typically CO2, so you may want to concern yourself with their carbon footprint, but we're not worried about the solvents involved. Hazardous location. Good question, Jeff.
I did not pick the number, but when I was with my former employer, I was actually part of the technical committee, and we were in the pre-first draft process for that document. That document will cover the fire protection requirements for these facilities. Chapter 38, NFA 1, has requirements for these facilities as well, but keep in mind, Chapter 38 has additional electrical requirements, not in Article 512 for LP gas extraction facilities. They have bonding requirements for bonding of all conductive equipment and surfaces. In addition, they have emergency power requirements for the ventilation and the solvent gas detection, and also the lighting in the extraction facility. So just keep in mind, you're seeing these. 512 doesn't give you everything. You might have to go to those other standards.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thanks, Brian. And there was a great article in the IAEI magazine written by Nick Sasso as well that went over some of those topics. Ventilation, emergency systems, ensure the ventilation is maintained, lighting similar. Yeah, really good. Thank you.
All right.
I'll go ahead and weigh in. I'm the chairman of panel 14, Mark Smith from NECA. When this first came out to us in the PI stage, this actually came from the Fire Marshals Association due to the excessive amount of people doing this process incorrectly, I'll say, possibly illegally. But that being said, there was a great need for this to educate people and the inspecting authorities that when they see this process, they need to at least throw a flag up and say, okay, and just like you were saying, we're not the classifying people. That's the insurance people. That's the architects and the builders. And, you know, they're supposed to classify these areas due to the owners. This is how we do our process. Now, whether they do it correctly or not, and you know, well, no, they will still possibly have little fires here and there due to a flame. So just be knowledgeable of it. And thank you very much for the presentation. Very well done.
Thank you. Thank you. I just want to remind you guys that in March, Rocky Mountain chapters having our meeting. You don't have to wait till Western session. You guys can come see us in March.
We won't tease you with samples there. They'll be there.
Yeah, no confusing.
All right, very good. Thank you very much, gentlemen. That was a great presentation. I know I learned a lot. If we could do a couple things real quick. Jack, we missed you last night.